In this video, I'm going to help you choose whether you should use Net Promoter Score or CSAT or Customer Effort Score for measuring and improving customer satisfaction in your organisation. I'm Guy Letts, the founder of Customer Sure. We've helped hundreds of companies get up and running with customer feedback, each one choosing the best methodology for their needs. So we've got a lot of experience of what works well and works not so well. Before we get into the detail of which one to choose, let me make a couple of points which will help you make the right decision. The first point to make is that you're doing a brilliant thing. When I ran a large customer service department, of all the initiatives that we tried, measuring customer feedback and acting on the results delivered by far the biggest improvement in customer satisfaction, customer retention, and actually putting extra cash on our bottom line. It really did make a big impact on the business. Secondly, don't worry too much about choosing between each different methodology. Any one of them can work well and deliver good results. Equally, any one of them can work badly and deliver poor results if it's not implemented well. So don't worry too much about choosing the question. There are other factors that are more important. And thirdly, a bit of a warning, do pay attention to those other factors and thinking through how you're going to implement the feedback system. Getting the customer experience of feedback right is just as important as getting the customer experience right of all the other aspects of your customer's relationship and interactions with you. Let's look at Net Promoter Score. We're a licensed Net Promoter Score vendor, so we're very familiar with it, but we're not wedded to it. So if something else is more suitable, then we'll recommend that instead. Net Promoter Score was pioneered by a chap called Fred Reichelt, working with a team of colleagues, and they found that there was a correlation between asking a particular question and the scores and results associated with that question, and linking that to whether a company would grow or shrink in the long term. Net Promoter Score is based on the now very familiar question, how likely would you be to recommend this organisation to a friend or a colleague? It's usually scored on a 0 to 10 scale. If you score 0 to 6, then you are categorised as a detractor. You've generally got a negative view of the organisation. If you score 7 or 8, then you're categorised as a passive. That means you're fairly neutral. You're probably not going to leave or defect or go anywhere, but neither are you going to give word-of-mouth referrals or be confident enough to recommend the organisation to a friend. If you scored a 9 or a 10, that meant that you were confident enough to put your reputation on the line, be happy to recommend it to a friend or a colleague, and be confident enough that they would have just as good an experience as you have. It's measured on a scale from -100% to +100%, and it's based on a fairly simple calculation. Now, the thing about Net Promoter is it's about the organisation as a whole. So it's great for issues of customer retention and customer acquisition. Are you going to stay? Are you going to go? Are you going to recommend them? Or you're not going to recommend them. What it's not so good at is measuring quality in a specific area. So it's not so good at measuring the performance of individual people. It's not so good at measuring the performance of a small unit within the company, because that doesn't necessarily reflect whether the customer is going to stay or leave. It just reflects whether they've had a bad experience on that particular interaction. And it's good to use alongside it 3 or 4 more questions to give you diagnostic information about specific areas within the company. Let's sum up on Net Promoter Score and look at the pros and cons. It's quite popular now. Many customer service professionals are familiar with Net Promoter Score. It's simple for customers. It's easy to understand the question, and it's simple to answer on the 0 to 10 scale. It sets the bar higher than just being satisfied, so it's a better measure of sentiment. Would you be prepared to go so far as recommending the company, not just are you satisfied with them yourself? And the best thing about Net Promoter Score is that the methodology emphasises the importance of closing the loop. That is, following up on whatever the customer's fed back to you. Now, this should be a huge advantage, but what I see is that many people falter here and they don't get the benefits that they should because they focus too much on just the measurement of Net Promoter Score and not enough on the follow-up. And now let's look at the disadvantages. What are the downsides of Net Promoter Score? Well, the first one is it's a loyalty question. So it's not the best for measuring specific interactions. It's good where there's an ongoing relationship, like somewhere like professional services, somewhere where you deal with people on an ongoing basis and there aren't particular interactions that you want to measure, or maybe subscription services that renew from one year to the next. It's not great for new customers. They haven't yet had a chance to form a view on whether they'd recommend you, so it can be quite frustrating to ask them a question that's not appropriate for that stage. It'd be like going on a date with somebody and asking on the first meeting, do you love me? Great question, but way too early. The calculation for Net Promoter Score is simple, but it's not generally very well understood. Even within organisations that are using it, there's often confusion about how it's calculated and what the number actually means. So that can be a bit of a disadvantage. It's billed as the ultimate question, the only question you ever need to ask. But that's a bit of an overstatement. It shouldn't be the only question that you ask. It doesn't give you any information on what or on why. So a few additional questions are always required. Otherwise the customer's frustrated because they can't tell you why they've given you a particular score. So it's a great methodology. As long as you use it wisely, as long as you focus on that all-important follow-up, and as long as you don't use it too early. And it's best to use it with some other questions where you have specific interactions, maybe a contact centre or a sales team, where you want to understand quality at the transactional level. Let's look at CSAT. Now CSAT's not owned or pioneered by one particular organisation in the same way that Net Promoter Score is. So it's much more flexible, but it's also open much more to interpretation and how each people implement their own particular version of it. There's no standard definition. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It does mean that it's completely flexible for you to use and adopt how you want it to. And it does have the great advantage that it's very, very simple for customers to understand and for staff to understand. Because it is so flexible, it's not valid to compare CSAT between different organisations and get a comparative measure. But I'd argue very strongly that that's also true of Net Promoter Score. Although superficially the question is the same on Net Promoter Score, there are so many other parameters and so many other factors, how it's asked, when it's asked, and it makes comparisons of that type very unsound in my experience. So let's look at the advantages of CSAT. It's very flexible, so you can use it for relationship and for looking at the detail of individual transactions. And it's very simple. It's very simple for customers to answer the question, are you satisfied? And to give that on any particular scale that you want to use. And it's very simple for staff to understand that. It's like a green, amber, red. Very, very simple to work out what the customer is. There's no real downside to CSAT. The one thing I would say though is that the question is not quite so rigorous as the Net Promoter question. To ask if I'm satisfied says, would I go anywhere? Am I happy? Well, I might be happy to put up with a few niggles and a few foibles. I'm not going anywhere, but I kind of know what I'm in for. But that doesn't mean that I'd be happy to put my reputation, put my neck on the line and recommend you to a friend or colleague, confident that they'd have just as good as an experience as I would like them to have. That's where Net Promoter is a slightly better question because it's more exacting. Would I recommend you? It's a tougher test. CSAT's a good general purpose method. It's very popular, it's very simple. There's no rigid definition, but that doesn't limit its effectiveness. All these methods, whichever one you choose, succeed or they fail based on what you do with the responses, not on how you measure them. Finally, let's look at customer effort score. Like Net Promoter Score, it's based on using a standard question. How easy did the organisation make it for me to handle my issue or solve my problem, whatever it was that I got in touch with them to do? And that could be online, or it could be in person, or it could be on the telephone. So great advantage, like CSAT, of being very simple and very flexible. Let's look at the pros and cons. The advantages. Well, it's great for transactions. It's great for those short, self-contained interactions. For example, when you contact an organisation, maybe you're placing an order, or you're asking a question, or you want to get a problem resolved. How easy was it to do that? Was it easy to get through to the person that you needed to? Did they solve the problem quickly and effectively and first time? So it's good for all sorts of interactions with an organisation like that, where somebody phones up with an issue, with a question or with a problem, and you really want to streamline those, not only to benefit your customer, but also to reduce the time and effort that you as an organisation take to service those issues. Second advantage, it's a very customer-centric question. Net Promoter question, for example, is actually a little bit focused more towards the organisation. But this one is based on what the customer wants you to be good at, rather than what you want to know about or what data you want to collect. So it's about them, it's not about you. It's about making their life better, not about giving you data. And that's always a great way to approach collecting customer feedback. So it's an excellent way to know exactly what you need to do to improve customer experience. Now, what are the disadvantages? Well, it's process oriented. So it's focusing on processes and systems rather than on people. And there's always a danger in that. There's a danger it can focus on making processes better rather than on making customers happier. Business should always be about people. It doesn't give you any indication about whether you're going to retain that customer or whether they're happy enough to recommend you and refer new people for word of mouth recommendations. So it doesn't tell you particularly about the relationship, just about on that most recent experience that they've had. Now, there's great value in that, but recognise that you're missing out, and you might need to combine it actually with a Net Promoter question or a separate question about the relationship. To sum up then, it's good to choose one methodology as your core standard methodology across your organisation to identify where your strengths and weaknesses are and to help you target where improvements are required. It's also important to remember that that's not the only aspect of customer feedback that you should focus on. Making improvements to your processes, to your people, to your systems, that's one aspect of it. But sometimes customers will give you feedback that you need to act on straight away. And if you don't do that, then you're putting that customer's retention at risk. Okay, how to choose between these three different methodologies? Well, firstly, use the pros and cons and match them up against how you do business with your customers. How do you interact with them? Is it much more of a relationship and an ongoing interaction? Is it kind of service industry? Or is it transaction based? Or is it a mixture of the two? If it is a combination of the two, then use Net Promoter Score where it's appropriate to ask about the overall relationship. And use Customer Effort Score to understand the particular strengths and weaknesses of each interaction, each process, and each way in which they come into contact with you. And CSAT. Well, CSAT's a great general purpose to use. You can use that for relationship, you can use it for measuring the quality of individual ones. So if you just wanted to use one, you can use CSAT. But it's also valid to use it in conjunction with Net Promoter Score or Customer Effort Score. The key thing is to think about your customer on the receiving end of this question and choose the question that's going to be most appropriate for them at that point in dealing with you. Is the question going to seem awkward or is it going to feel appropriate? So that's it. I hope that's been useful. Go to customersure.com. We've got loads of resources. We've got ebooks, we've got helpful articles, we've got videos. And if there's something that we can do to help, we'd love to hear from you.